Hi, everyone. Thanks, Phil. So I want to talk a little bit about the interview and application process. Probably not the most interesting topic, but it's pretty crucial to getting into radiology. We all know it's getting a bit more competitive, so it's worth putting a bit of thought in at this stage to how we're going to get everyone into training. Um, yeah, I guess we'll just dive in. So this is really the problem. We've seen this graph already this morning in Abs's talk, and it demonstrates the kind of rising interest in radiology. I think it's probably for a variety of reasons. People are sick of working on the wards. It's fun. It's a nice specialty. It's got a work-life balance. We've heard about all those points already, but there is a problem here. It's getting more and more difficult to get into. As a few of us have alluded to already, I think this isn't something to put you off. I hope I can demonstrate today that there are a few ways we can look at getting the kind of application polished and getting through this, but it's something to bear in mind. Looking here at the numbers from last year, we can see that there were about 3,000 people applying, and there are about 350 posts. Some people are kind of whittled down from where's my cursor, from here to step two, and that's really if you don't fulfill the basic requirements for starting a training program. For example, you haven't completed a sufficient amount of time working within the NHS. After that, the huge kind of whittling point is taking the MSRA, and that's hugely important in the application. We'll come back to that. And then they interview about 2 people for every 1 post. The numbers will probably be slightly inflated for this cycle of applications, but only time will tell. That's given an overall competition ratio of about 9 to 1, but your odds are much better if you make it to interview with a competition ratio of 2 to 1. I think this is the solution, basically. You hear this time and time again when you ask for advice applying for radiology, but the MSRA is really quite important, mainly because it gets you from this step of 2,700 people down to this number of people being interviewed. I think they've increased that this year to 850, but still, that's a significant step down in numbers, and that's all determined by the MSRA. The MSRA then comes to count later when they're figuring out who gets offered the posts, and it counts 20% towards your final score. That weighting has been changed this application, reduced slightly to what it was last year. I think it was 30%. The rest of that score is determined by your portfolio and also how well you do in the interview. So really, step 1 of the solution is doing really well in the MSRA. Step 2 is getting a nice portfolio score, and then step 3 is doing well in the interview. Just a quick side note about applying straight after F2. I think there are pros and cons. If I think about my cohort in the academy, we've got people who come straight from F2. People come from other training programs. Plenty of people come from F3s, F4s. There's pros and cons. I think it's a personal decision, really. What I would say is that I don't think there's much harm in applying straight away. Even if you don't get a job, I think it's pretty good practice. You might get to interview, get to practice that. It might just help you get your portfolio and things straight, which I think there is some value to. And if always the competition ratio is getting higher, which I guess is one nice thing. But then there are some nice things to do in F3. It can be a nice time to travel, to locum. You might just need a break after 2 years on the wards. Or you might want some more time to work on your portfolio. So I think it's really a personal decision, but there are pros and cons. I realise it's quite a messy slide, but it's the only way I can get all the information kind of visually onto one slide. But this is the next few months of your life if you're applying for radiology this time round. I know some of you might not be, and that's fine. This is just a bit of an overview. But really, the application window is already opened. You'll be able to see the application open on Oriel if you log in, and that will close later in November. There'll then be a time where you sit the MSRA, which will be early January. MSRA results will come up, I think, a couple of weeks after that. I don't even know if I put that on here. And then later you'll be invited to interview in kind of mid to late February, with the interviews happening mid-March, 12th to 15th March, and then offers later in March. So it does take a few months, the process, but really, if you're applying for radiology this year, the applications are open, so you need to try and figure it out over the next few weeks. So I just want to start by talking about the portfolio. This is submitted. You score your portfolio as part of your application. So that is within this red time period here. So before the 23rd of November, before you've submitted your application. You upload the evidence to justify the score you've given yourself later in February. And then it gets verified. It gets checked, I think, by 2 radiology consultants. And that gives you your confirmed score, which you can then argue with a bit if you don't agree. But basically, that's your score. And as mentioned earlier, it contributes about 30% to your final ranking score. Just some basic rules to start off with. The self-assessment, they say, has to be accurate at time of submission. So if you're going to score points for something or score yourself for something, it must have been completed by the 23rd of November or whatever that day was. I think it's 23rd of November when you submit your application. So presentations are only valid once you've actually given the presentation. Publications are a little bit more lenient on if it's been accepted for publication and you can get a letter from the editor, then you can count the publication on your portfolio. Rule 2 is you can claim a single achievement under multiple domains. So, for example, you can score points for an audit in the audit category, but if you presented that same audit at a conference, you can score points also as a presentation. And then I think point 3 is kind of a little bit less relevant, but all achievements have to have been attained in the last 10 years. So yeah, probably less important unless you're a very overachieving kid. So I'm just going to go through this year's portfolio scoring. This is probably going to be slightly less interesting if you're not applying this year, so apologies. But the advantage of that is it would give you a bit more time to try and make some changes. If you're applying this year, I'm going to try and give some pointers as to where you might pick up some extra points the next few weeks. But it's going to be a little bit tricky, but I think I've got some ideas. So this is part 1, looking at your commitment to radiology as a specialty, and this really centres around spending time in radiology departments. The gold standard way to do this is to do 2 taster weeks in different settings. Those taster weeks or significant exposures, as they call them, have to be at least 3 days long, and can be a taster week, can be an SSC, elective, can be research experience within the clinical setting. The exposures, if you're counting more than one, they have to be in different settings. So, for example, a DGH and a tertiary centre, or maybe one department and another department. But they've changed it this year, and they've said that attending 3 MDTs or 3 radiology lists can count as one significant exposure. And I think that might be a way of trying to get some quick points over the next few weeks. If you can persuade someone to let you in for some MDT prep, or to join a listing breast clinic, I think you probably could get 3 before you have to submit the application. So if you're sitting on 2 points, you might be able to get 6, or if you're sitting on 6 points, you might be able to get 10 just by going to a few MDTs. Say you're going to the MDTs already, you could just ask the radiologist to whether you can join them for a bit of prep beforehand. Leadership management points are kind of fairly self-explanatory. I think it's really difficult to make any changes to the portfolio now because you have to have held the post for at least 6 months. But if you're looking for applying to radiology next year, you might try and get involved at least at a local level to get yourself 1 or 2 points. I found these leadership things quite difficult to get unless you're kind of a real high achiever. But yeah, there are points there to be had. The more national your leadership position is, the more points you get. Teaching, they've got some kind of quite specific definitions about teaching, about what a major contribution means, what national versus local means, and I've kind of written them all down there. I think what I would highlight here is that I think it's relatively simple getting 2 points at least here. And if you're sitting on 0, this could be another thing to consider, is you can go from 0 to 2 points by just doing a single small group teaching session in your local hospital. So I don't know whether over the next few weeks you could consider just gathering up some of your mates and just doing something about chest X-rays or some little bit of teaching about radiology and getting a consultant to sign you off for it. And that could make a difference. That's the difference between 0 and 2 points. Otherwise, it's about organising regional teaching programmes, and all the other ones have to have lasted 3 months' time to really count towards something. I've just seen a question on the chat. It says, in the application, can you include audits that have not completed the re-audit cycle by November the 23rd, given the re-audit is in progress or there is intended a date of completion? I think, do I mention this? I'll come back to that question when I'm talking about audits, but I think so, yeah. Formal teaching qualifications, again, fairly difficult to get done last minute. I don't know many people who've got a formal master's teaching level qualification, but if you do, that's great. Going from 0 to 2 points, I think, is achievable. There's lots of these kind of rip-off courses online, train the trainers and stuff. If you want to part, I think it's like 180 quid. You can part with that, and you can essentially buy yourself 2 points. You can do it fully online. If you need a boost, that might make the difference. Personally, I don't know. It feels like a kind of racket to me. But anyway, that's a kind of personal decision. But if you're struggling for points, you might be able to find a free online course that is equal to 2 days worth of time. And if you can find that, I don't know, that's like gold dust. Share it with your mates, and you can all get 2 points. Coming back to audits, what they really want, ideally, is for someone to have led 2 or more audits. This is the full points. 2 or more audits that are related to radiology, fine. And has resulted to a change of practice. And the way they define resulting in a change is either by demonstrating a change on a closed loop audit, so that's a second audit cycle, or by improvement in a quality metric, I guess, if you're doing a quality improvement project. If you haven't demonstrated change in practice, you can only score 3 points for the audit. So coming back to that question, can you include audits that have not completed the re-audit cycle? Yes, you can include them, but they wouldn't. But that would be for 3 points.
Unless the first cycle result.
Yeah, unless you can demonstrate on in some other quality metric. To be honest, I'm not quite sure what that means. But this is the kind of exact wording from the document. Unless you can demonstrate it's shown an improvement in a different quality metric. How you would have measured that metric without doing a second audit loop? Yeah, I'm not quite sure. But yeah, so no, it would score 3 points. Some tips for audits. I think radiology audits can be really quick to do. And that's probably because all the information is there already on the PAC system. And if you choose your audit carefully, you could turn around one in a couple of weeks. I don't think it'd be a very good audit, but who cares? And if you need ideas for audits, the Royal College of Radiology have a whole bank of kind of pre-planned audit ideas, sometimes even complete with kind of spreadsheets for you to put the data straight into, all sorts of stuff. Just Google RCR Audit Live. It's a really useful resource for radiology audits. Back to the questions. Do you know if integrated masters would count? Yes, integrated masters do count as long as you've done the degree since starting your primary medical qualification. That will count. Cool. That's audits. Academic achievements, again, I don't know many people who've done a PhD prior to starting radiology. That's a bit overkill, but again, if you have, congrats. Getting a publication can be pretty difficult, particularly if you're trying to do something for this round of applications. That's impossible. I guess my tip here is just make sure that you're not forgetting that weird little research project you did as a medical student, or some academic summer school. I'm not really sure what that is, but if you've done that, you might have forgotten about it, and you might be able to get yourself 1 point just by remembering it. So just really scrutinize what you've done so far and make sure you don't miss out. And then prizes, again, difficult to get last minute. You can get kind of 1 point maybe here if you can figure out some kind of prize awarded by your local hospital. I'm not sure what we have in the NNN. I haven't looked, but that might be something to look into. Otherwise, you're looking at kind of national or national meetings, or doing really well in med school. Cool. Other kind of general tips of portfolio before we move on is just make sure you really read the wording on the portfolio. I've tried to cover a little bit of that today, but I would really recommend going through word by word, making sure, as Beth alluded to, you're scoring the points that you deserve. I had a friend, for example, who applied for core surgical training, different, but he wasn't awarded his points for his audits because he didn't put the supervising consultant's GMC number on the in his evidence, and without a GMC number, apparently they don't count. So you just need to play the game. It's a stupid game, but you need to play it. I quite liked presenting my audit in quite an easy to read way. Not my audit, my portfolio. This is all uploaded online, but I kind of combined all my PDFs into one neat PDF with a little cover page summarizing all the evidence. I don't know. I thought that might make a difference, but it takes a bit of time. Cool. Going on to the MSRA. You sit this in early January. You don't need to specifically apply for it. Separately, you'll be contacted after you've submitted your application to book a slot if you've kind of made it through the initial step of the application. And as alluded to earlier, it determines who gets interviewed. So the top 850 scorers this year will get interviewed, and it contributes 20% to your final ranking. So very, very important. As you might already know, the MSRA is in two parts. Half of it is kind of SJT style questions, and the other half is single best answer questions and extended matching questions. There's no negative marking. It's not really out of anything. It's kind of normalized around a score of 250 for each paper, meaning that a score of 500 is the average score. And last year, to make the cutoff for interview, you need to score above 543. And obviously, the higher you score above that, the better you'll do, because you would have made it to interview. But then also that score comes back and also determines your final score for your overall application, which determines your ranking. I don't really want to go through these questions too much because honestly, I have no real gems of wisdom to give you about these SJT style questions. But this is an example question that falls into the kind of professional dilemmas category. And you'll recognize this kind of question from having done SJT before. I find them really, really difficult. As I say, I don't have any real tips. The answers for here are below. I don't think I'm going to spend much time going through this, but I've got some general tips coming up. And then you can also get this other style of question in the professional dilemmas paper, which is slightly different. It's not about ranking answers like this one was. It's more about choosing three of the best options out of however many options they've got listed here. In this case, it was C, D, and E, but I'm not going to spend any more time on that. I think one thing to say about the MSRA, and there's a lot of people say you can't prepare for it. I don't think that's true. I think you can prepare for it. There are online question banks. It's really frustrating to prepare for. I think it's a horrible experience, but I think practice does help. Certainly for the clinical side of it, I think revision is really useful. For the SJT side of it, I think it's a little bit more limited. I think some of the online resources were a bit rubbish, but I still think it's so important, the MSRA, that it's just worth putting some time into if you've got it. Other places you can read is looking at the official MSRA example questions, which you can find online, looking at the foundation program application SJT questions, which you can also find online because they're very, very similar. And then just making sure you're up to date on your GMC guidance, I think is probably worth reading through. And then thinking about exam technique, I think is also quite important. Remember, in those ranking questions, the SJT ranking questions, you get a majority of the points if you can figure out which is the best option and which is the worst option. As long as you put the other options in between in whatever order, you'll still get a fair chunk of points. So that might be a tactic if you're really struggling with a question, is just find the best answer and the worst answer and get those in place and then not worry so much about the rest. And then I think the other thing to say is the clinical paper, while the content is I think manageable, I think the time pressure is quite significant. And I would recommend just practicing under some time pressure as you get close to the exam if you have access to a question bank. The interview. So as we mentioned, this will be in mid-March 2024. Top 850 performers from the MSRA will be invited to interview. They're doing it for a new platform this year called CupaCom Recruit. I don't know what that is. And it contributes 50% to your final ranking score, where it used to contribute 30. So that's quite important. Frustratingly, having kept the interview, I think, identical for the past 2 or 3 years, they've now changed it for this coming year. So for this current application, it's now 20-minute interview. It used to be 15, and it's made up of 2 10-minute stations. they haven't given much information at all on the application documents, but they have said these kind of vague phrases, things like it will cover different criteria from the person's specification. It will assess your commitment to the specialty and communication skills. It's a bit difficult to know how to interpret that, but we can have a chat. Very quickly, this is the old interview format. I suspect they won't stray too far from this when thinking about content to ask people. And this was basically a little bit about showing what you've done to demonstrate your interest in radiology. That's basically the same stuff you've done to score the points on the portfolio. A little bit about coping with pressure and managing uncertainty. I wouldn't be surprised if they asked something about that-ish in the new interview format. A bit about team involvement, and then a bit about your attributes and skills. So while this isn't this year's interview, I suspect the style of question will be about the same, but please don't hold me to that because nobody knows. Interview tips. I quite liked planning out some answers to some of the questions that I thought might come up. I think this can be a little bit dangerous if you end up getting a bit too kind of mechanical and over practiced in your answers. But I think it'd be worth making some bullet points for each question. I used to just get an A4 page, write the question at the top, and then just make a few bullet points underneath, and then just practice that a lot with kind of whoever would listen to me. I think it's important not to lose sight of the fact that an interview is about selling yourself, and it's important to get that balance between get the balance right. Of course, you don't want to come across arrogant, but actually, when they're trying to whittle down 850 people, you need to give them the opportunity to give you points for what you've done. So there's just no point being coy about it. You've got to sell yourself, and you've got to talk about the things that you've done. I thought it was useful to just write a list of kind of five or so things that I'd be annoyed if I got to the end of the interview and hadn't said. So these are like your key achievements, the things that you're most proud of. And I had a little thing before the interview to figure out how I might weave them into different answers. So, for example, if they were going to ask me about coping with pressure and managing uncertainty, I might talk about I don't know, nothing really comes to mind, but I might talk about a particular thing that I'd done in the past. Equally, I might be able to weave that same thing into a question about team involvement. So I think that's quite an important thing to think about. And then just like some basic tips about getting your setup right for interviews. Got to be in a quiet place. You've got to have decent lighting. People say, have your laptop up at head height so you're kind of making eye contact and looking directly at your interviewers. And then I think it's worth dressing smart for it as well. Okay, so that's basically what I wanted to talk about. I suspect there might be a few questions, so I'm very happy to answer any questions. Bev's already mentioned these resources that I think are really good. I think Radiology Cafe is like a stunningly good resource, and it has all this information and more. And then, of course, read as much as you can of the official documents, the self-assessment guide, the person specification, which is pretty vague but worth reading because that's what they're going to interview you based on. And the applicant's handbook, I think, are all worth reading. All right, any questions? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. No. Sorry, that's an answer to the question about would deferring start date affect chance of getting in. No, I think those are two separate processes. So I don't think so. Okay.
Thanks very much, Lillian. That was excellent. I would just add a few things. If you are going to do some of those, say, find some MDT lists, whatever, in the next month, get evidence for it. The letter signed by consultants. Otherwise, if there's no evidence, they won't accept it. And with the interview questions, try and use your experiences on your taster weeks or whatever, and say how your lived experience relates to what you would face in a career in radiology and how you would be suited to tackling that. And that's basically it. So yeah, feedback link, there's a QR code and a URL if it doesn't work. And we'll be around for a bit to answer any more questions. Average portfolio score last year, no idea. Again, Reddit after their interview, after the MSRA and interviews, like people post their scores and whether they got an interview or not, and you can kind of work out what the cutoff was. So, and I imagine portfolio score is also on there as well. So yeah, any and all questions about anything radiology, will be around for a bit. Radiology is great. I've never looked back. There weren't many times in my foundation years where I looked forward to coming into work, but I do every day in radiology. As the others have said, it's so friendly, and everyone is keen to help and learn. If you have a question about a specific subspecialty, you just walk down the corridor and knock on someone's door, and they're always happy to answer. I feel like people actually, with consultants, care about your training. They're invested in you, more than any other job I've been in so far. Significant exposure. Would a taster week at NNH and then at JPH count? I think NNN counts as a tertiary centre, so yeah, tertiary and DGH would. Or does tertiary and DGH not matter anymore?
No, I think that would count, but I would set it in your portfolio and say, you know, when you're attaching the evidence of these taster weeks, so I'd say it's great seeing both the DGH and the tertiary centre setting, and here's why. And then you've kind of forced their hand, really. They have to give you the points for being in different settings because you told them it was different settings. So I think that's why when I was putting together my portfolio, I liked making a little cover page that I added to the start of the PDF, because I could kind of almost control the narrative a little bit and say why I thought my evidence justified the points that I was applying for. So I think, yeah, that would definitely count. But if you really want to nail it, tell them why those are different settings and what you learned in them.
I'd also emphasize the Radiology Cafe being an excellent resource. Up to date, for example, with the whole interview thing changing, nobody knows what the questions are going to be, whereas they've used previously, through the last 3 years were the same. They have a list of possible interview questions in lots of different topics, so have a look through those. And yeah, Audit Live, again, as Louis mentioned, is an excellent resource. They have loads of templates, and you can do them quickly. I mean, I did one last year about like abdo X-ray requesting from ED. There's very specific RCR guidelines about what constitutes a justified request for abdo X-rays, and then I just looked at a month of ED requests and whether they were justified. So yeah, there are loads of similar templates. Yeah, and lots of different roads to radiology, as Louis said. Don't have to apply this year. Doesn't matter what you've done. We have, Beth did GP. Someone else did obs and gynae. Someone came from IMT2. There are surgical consultants who then do radiology. It doesn't matter. Do we get a certificate from this? Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Ask Sue.
Sue Cheng will know. But yes, if you fill in the feedback, you should get a certificate. And be here if you come up with any questions. There's still lots of us here, so just stand here waiting for this. I'll leave the feedback up there. And good luck.